Hello everyone, I'm just preparing my daily stitching for 2026 and I thought I'd just share the process a little bit in case you want to do something similar if you're planning on embarking on a daily stitching adventure next year, and next year is very soon. You can see that this is my 2026 template. Let me talk about that first. That's this, which you can download from my online shop, and that gives you the grid lines and the numbers of the days and all of that kind of thing. I'll put links underneath in the text underneath the video for you to find all that. But you can also now buy pre-printed fabric from my Spoonflower shop. This is the linen cotton canvas. That isn't the 2026 grid, that's the 2022 one. Any grid will work for any year. They've all got 365 blocks in, so entirely up to you whether you want to get the template and trace it yourself or whether you want to buy the pre-printed fabric. If you get the fabric, I would suggest washing it first. Maybe wash it and iron it, and you can see I haven't ironed mine, it doesn't matter. I'll come to that in a minute. Or of course you can make up your own grid. You don't have to use mine. You could just draw a series of boxes and that would be fine. So I did a little sample based on the 2026 templates just to see how it would look, because what happens with next year is you get some little shapes to cut out and draw around. So for example, you could draw around a circle one day, or a heart shape, or we could stitch a little house one day. You just sort of draw around the thing to give you a guideline for what to stitch. Little tree there. Oh, there's a star as well, and a leaf. So there's a few shapes to play with next year, and I'll see how they work from January onwards. But I worked a little sample which I've made into this pocket case thing, which I'm going to keep my stitching in. And I found that I really liked the visual effect of having couched all the grid lines first. So you can see it makes a really nice framework for adding in your stitching. It's absolutely not essential because for my 2025 stitching, I've worked each outline on the day. So you can see this is some of what's left, entirely blank, so I need to outline those on the day. So you can do it either way. You can outline them all first if you've got the time, or you can do it as you go along. But I as I say, I really like this sort of the continuity of the grid lines, rather than having each outline a different colour or a different texture. I find that quite pleasing, so I'm going to do that on my 2026 fabric. So I'm using a piece of vintage linen that I just happened to find. I've had it a while. Any medium weight cotton or linen fabric will do. If you can find vintage, it's usually better. It's nice to stitch on. It's if you're looking for kind of an old sheet or a tablecloth or something like that, something about that weight. So you can see that I have couched most of my lines just with decorative yarns. That's a cotton boucle, that's a silk boucle yarn, that's a very textured silk. That is a space-dyed textured chenille yarn. Any kind of textured or thick thread is fine. But I just wanted to demonstrate a few alternatives because you don't have to couch every single line. So let me just rearrange the camera a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing, and I'll show you a few alternatives to couching if you want to pre-prepare this grid. One of the easiest ways that you can create a solid line is with something like a whipped running stitch. So let's start that. Incidentally, you will see that there's little thread tag thing in this corner, that's just to remind me which is the top. So I'll be starting the 1st of January here. It's very easy to lose track of which way up it is when you're constantly turning it round to work these grid lines. So mark the top just so that you know where to start. It doesn't really matter because there are 365 blocks. It doesn't really matter. You know, if you start somewhere and you fill them all in, you'll still have a year. Now I'm just going to show you a way of starting without a knot or a loose end. It's sometimes called the waist knot method, but I mean, I find you don't actually need a knot. Just start a couple of inches or so from where you want to actually start, and just leave a little tail of thread there. We're just going to do a single back stitch there, and then we're going to come up a little bit away. What we're going to do is a kind of alternate running stitch. You're going to imagine that there's another running stitch in between here. So you're kind of doing a running stitch and then skipping to leave enough space to do another running stitch, because we're going to come back down the line. And by the time we get back to this thread end here, we can just cut it off. So it's called the waist knot method. I call it the knotless waist knot method because you don't need to put the knot in. Okay, so we get to the end there, turn it around and we come back down the line. I'm just going to do a tiny stitch there because I didn't plan that very well. And what we're going to do now is just fill in the missing running stitch. Like so. So by this point we can just snip that end off there. And there's no knot, there's no flappy end, it's all very neat on the back. If you've been with me a while, you'll know that neatness isn't something I get particularly bothered about, but sometimes, you know, it's nice not to have too many knots. So there we go, we just carry on along there, just do a running stitch all the way along. And then what we're going to do is, let me find one I've already done. Let me just get a needle with some thread in it. This is another row of running stitch. You can choose a coordinating thread or a contrasting thread, and the same weight or slightly thinner, I would suggest. If you try and weave a thicker thread through some running stitch, you are going to distort it, and you may end up distorting the tension a bit, because it'll kind of pull the existing stitches out of shape a bit. So the same weight or slightly finer. Let me just get a thread and needle for that. Right, I've got a needle threaded here with some Silk Pearl 8 thread, and just fastened it off on the back, ready to start up here. And with the eye end of the needle, I'm just going to pass this thread through the running stitches. You do have to be careful with your tension, because obviously you don't want to be pulling anything. And basically we're just passing the thread under each running stitch, and it creates this nice rope effect sort of line. And you can also, you can also whip it the other way. You'd need to start here, but then, you know, come through from that side. So if I'm going to unpick this because I don't really want to do this, but you could, if you wanted a double effect, if you imagine that's a new thread, you can whip it from the other side as well. Again, just under each stitch. And it just makes the line a bit more chunky and a little bit thicker. So you get a kind of double woven effect. It is rather nice, and that looks very similar to a couched thread. So that's one very easy way you can create outlines. And then here's some other examples of what you might do. I'm just working on this sample because I'm kind of, you know, I'm kind of in the middle of that one. So just just to demonstrate on a couple of samples. And most of the threads I've got here are kind of equivalent to Pearl 8, cotton or silk, or probably 2 or 3 strands of DMC type thread would have the same effects. Experiment, see what you like best. So firstly, this little outline stitch here is coral stitch, and that's basically about the same length as running stitch really, but just sort of take a tiny stitch either side of the line, and then you bring your thread over and under, sort of round. It's like half a French knot, and then forward again, over and under, and it makes a little line with this rather interesting texture, and again it looks like a couched yarn. Quite easy. And very effective, I think. I don't use coral stitch anywhere near enough. I should use it more. I like it. It's very easy to get a bit samey with your stitches, isn't it? To keep using the same ones over and over again, but it is good to have some variety. So there we go, that's coral stitch. You can find probably better embroidery tutorials everywhere. Probably. You know, just sort of search for the stitch you want, and you'll find videos aplenty for it. And then this one is split stitch, which I'm doing with a Pearl 8 green silk thread. Split stitch comes down here and back up through half of the previous thread. And again, that creates a really nice line. So down there, a little bit like back stitch, probably backwards or upside down. So when you come back up, you're splitting the thread of the previous stitch. It's kind of 1 step forward, two steps back, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's that's better, isn't it? 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You'd never get anywhere. There we go. This one is kind of slow progress, but it's very meditative. It's a nice stitch to do. Take your time, do it slowly, and you end up with, again, a nice dimensional raised line. Very nice. It's a little bit like braid or something like that. Again, really nice stitch. You can do a simple back stitch over the line. What could be easier? Again, perfectly effective. Back one, slightly ahead, backwards and forwards. And if you wanted to give that a bit more dimension, you could also, let me just finish that off. If you imagine this is a different thread, or the same thread, you can whip the back stitch as well. So just pass the eye of the needle through each stitch, and that will just give it a bit more dimension. I don't like the way you can see the gap between back stitch. You know, it looks, to me, it looks too much like a machine stitch, and I prefer the hand look. So I quite often like to cover the bit between the stitches where you can see that little dimple. I don't like seeing that. That's just personal preference. Just comes down to what you like and what you don't, what you find visually appealing. So you can whip the back stitch as well, and that just smooths out the line, makes it slightly more dimensional and slightly more solid looking. And it probably doesn't help that I've done that in a very dark thread that you can't see, but take my word for it, it looks pretty fine. There we go. Again, it's a slightly raised line. It feels really sturdy, very effective. And then you could also just do a pretty plain chain stitch to cover these lines. And again, you'll find a much better demonstration of chain stitch out there, probably. You're just coming, if you've not done chain stitch before, you're coming down into the loop of the last stitch, a little bit ahead, thread comes around the needle and straight back down into that gap. And you'd think that the chain would unravel, but it doesn't. Well, it would if you did that. It doesn't, because the loop around the needle holds it. And that makes a perfectly nice line as well. And again, you could whip that if you wanted to, just by passing a needle underneath. And again, that looks pretty effective too, especially I think in a space-dyed thread or hand-dyed thread that changes colour. You can see how pretty that looks, for example. And if you haven't got space-dyed or hand-dyed thread, you can try using, if you've got DMC stranded floss, you could try using 2 or 3 strands of different colours and, you know, mix the colours in the needle, and that also looks very effective. So, you know, it's quite easy to improvise these things. So I will continue preparing my 2026 daily stitching, and I will see you again probably in either late December to do a whistle-stop tour through my stitching for this year, and or to get started with some stitching for the new year. And in the meantime, if you're looking for help or advice getting started, you might consider taking my intuitive daily stitching course, which is available from my Teachable school. I'll put the links underneath the video for that as well. And that takes you through choosing fabric, choosing needles, choosing threads, some very basic simple stitches that you can work in a probably infinite number of ways and combine them in unusual ways to produce something that looks very much more complicated than it really is. And, you know, I also talk a bit about mindful stitching and taking this time to just slow down a little bit and reflect and just stand still. You know, life is busy enough. So there we go. I'm just going to finish that off on the underneath and then carry on along here and complete these other lines as well. So I hope that's been helpful, and I will see you a little bit later.